The American Montessori Society, in partnership with Nature's Classroom Institute, present the following environment program.
Hey everyone, it's Jordan again. For today's video, we are going to be doing a discussion and an activity based on the water cycle and the importance of runoff. So I'm sure all of you all are at least a little familiar with the water cycle. After all, it is one of the most important processes in our ecosystem. So the water cycle begins with the process of evaporation. So evaporation is just the transfer of surface water from rivers, lakes, streams, oceans. When exposed to heat, it turns into vapor. And now that vapor, being a little bit less dense, begins to float into the sky. And once it's in the sky, the process of condensation now begins. All those little droplets of water vapor begin to condense and become closely compacted and tight together, turning it into what we see outside as clouds. Once those clouds gain more and more water droplets, eventually they become extremely heavy. They get so heavy that they can no longer hold all the water within them, and it begins to fall to the ground. We see this in rain, snow, sleet, hail. This process is known as precipitation. So those are the three main parts of the water cycle. There is one that involves plants and photosynthesis, known as transpiration. As a plant goes through the process of photosynthesis, it also produces lots of water vapor that goes into the sky and is added to the water cycle. But there is something that I want to talk about that is very heavily involved in the water cycle, but can sometimes get overlooked when we are discussing it. And that is what is known as runoff. So runoff is not a new phenomenon, but in the last few decades or so, it has definitely become more important. So runoff in the world is basically when the ground becomes too saturated from rainwater, then the water has nowhere to go underground. So instead, it begins to run off of the surface of the ground towards rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans. Now, the reason it has become more important in the past few decades is because of the addition of many roads, parking lots, buildings. All these structures have created impermeable surfaces, and the water cannot soak through that, forcing it to turn into runoff. And as you may know from previous videos, the molecules in water, hydrogen and oxygen, tend to bond relatively easy to other molecules. So in this instance, when water is becoming runoff in a parking lot or a road, it is now picking up every single chemical and molecule along the way and adding it to its final destination. So when it comes to runoff, keeping your area clean, keeping your ecosystem clean is incredibly important because that pollution and those chemicals can easily get into our drinking water or our freshwater bodies when we have runoff involved. In no other place can we see runoff in action better than in a watershed. So what we're going to do for our activity today is we are going to build our very own watershed. So a watershed is an area of land where rainfall happens and it creates bodies of water. That may come in the form of a large freshwater lake or a stream or an aquifer underground, but it has the right variables and right components to create a freshwater source using rainwater. So the materials you're going to need to build your watershed. You will need some sort of shallow well, cake pan, something like that. You'll need a roll of aluminum foil. You will need a few different size containers. You can have as many as you want or as few as you want. Just make sure they're different sizes. You'll need a marker. You will need, I've chosen Kool-Aid, but you can use whatever you want. It needs to be 4 separate colors, and it needs to be something that can turn into a liquid. So drink powders are a really good choice, and like I said, we've used Kool-Aid. And then lastly, you need some sort of spray bottle to wet your watershed at the end. So for the first step, you are going to just arrange your containers inside your cake pan. You can use any arrangement you want, and you can place them anywhere you'd like. Just put them inside of the cake pan. So for the second step, you are just going to wrap your container and your cake pan in aluminum foil. Now try your best to make sure that you mold the foil around the edges of the cake pan as well as around all of the containers inside of it. Try to mold it as tightly as you can. Now here comes the creative part. So what you have just designed is essentially you've built a city on top of a watershed. This is a very common occurrence, especially in North America. Now, you can put anything you want in your cities, hotels, malls, movie theaters, whatever you want, but you must have 4 sections. Those sections are agriculture or farming, industrial or factories, commercial or shopping centers, and residential or houses. So for the next section, remember those 4 sections that I told you? Agriculture, industrial, commercial, and residential. You're going to use one of your 4 color powders to put in each one of those sections. The powder is going to represent what we are going to call byproduct. So the powder is the byproduct of that section of your city. So now here comes the fun part. We are going to play the role of a storm that has come across your city. And we are going to spray our city down with some water. However much you want, you're just going to you need to saturate it though. Make sure you make it nice and wet. And what you're going to do is, as you're spraying, I want you to observe what is going on in your city. What's happening to the powder? Where is it going? So now, what you can see is kind of take observations on what's going on. So here at the top, we have my residential and my agricultural section. So when it rained, the runoff has now gone into my industrial section. That pollution has now combined and pooled up down here. In my city, if this were a real city, this would be a product of maybe a lake or a river or a pond. So now, with the byproduct of residential and industrial, what do you think is sitting in that river or stream? All right, and that's pretty much the whole activity. Now that you've done it the first time, you can rearrange your city, you can rebuild it, you can redesign it, change it, try to make it work a little better. These are the actual type of issues that city planners and things have to deal with when it comes to new developments in their city or new structures being built. They have to factor in all of these things all at once. And that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoy doing this activity at home. And as always, stay safe.
If you'd like to incorporate nature into your classroom, visit discovernci.org/curriculum to download a variety of activities you can do with your students.
The preceding program was produced in partnership with the American Montessori Society.